Let me take let me take just a quick interlude to talk briefly about Hume and the is-ought problem. So just in summary, for people that aren't familiar with that, that's a famous philosophical way of thinking where David Hume, I think he was an English philosopher, wasn't he?
I believe it might be Scottish.
Scottish, maybe. I think you're right.
Let's say British.
Scottish.
Let's say British. So
that's all the same thing, though, for us Americans. but in any event, the idea is, and I'm going to just summarize it as best I can, is reason, logic, science, reason, whatever phrase you want to use, can tell us about the nature of reality or what we perceive to be reality, but it can't give us moral rules to follow. So when we talk about science can talk about this is the way the universe works, or this is the way this particular system works, but it can't tell us what we ought to do about it. It cannot give us moral imperatives. So, using the pandemic as an example, science can tell us how it replicates, where it came from, what the different etiologies of the disease are, things like that. But it can't tell us whether we ought to have a complete quarantine, a partial quarantine. It can't tell us about whether we should shut down businesses, what we should do about it. It doesn't answer science doesn't really answer moral questions. But what you were talking about, the contemplative tradition, that really is more where at least I look to when I'm looking for answers to normative questions or ought questions. So talk a little bit about, I've been a meditator, a long-time meditator, almost 15 years now, and have studied Buddhism and the science of the mind. And I'm very, very interested in this. Matter of fact, I've done a few podcasts on this. Talk about your views of the contemplative tradition, because one thing I have to tell you, Nick, one thing that worries the heck out of me that I've really tried to work on is I think the way the internet, social media, and things like that work now, we're being programmed, and we're always human beings have been programmed for thousands of years just by the stimulus you get in your environment. But now the stimulus is faster, it's stronger. Google has $1 trillion supercomputers using the latest scientific psychology to manipulate people. And I worry all the time that I'm going to be manipulated to the point where I don't even realize I'm being manipulated. So one of the reasons that I meditate and practice other contemplative traditions is to try to train my brain for that sort of thing. But talk a little bit about when you bring up the contemplative traditions and the is-ought idea, like where that fits in.
I'm really glad you said that about meditation, because one of the challenges that meditations face in the last 10 years is it's become, hip in companies, but it's been often taken away from its moral context from which it developed. And all meditations of any type ultimately were about not just seeing the truth of enlightenment and our non-duality, our oneness, our togetherness, but also about now what do I do? The ought question, what do I do now? And you can see through the history of Buddhism, Taoism, Gnosticism, how these wisdom traditions often got into politics, because that's where decisions about ought have always been made, now more so in business, actually, probably, or as much so in business as in traditional politics. People are making ought decisions about how society is going to be. And I'm really inspired to hear you say that meditation for you is not just about all that stuff, but about clarifying your mind and keeping it clear so that you're not being programmed by not just your parents or advertising, but by all these algorithms that are coding and speeding up our own tendencies to seek people and ideas that confirm our own brilliance, that trigger our pain and fear and worry and disconnection from each other, that spark conflict, that spark desire, that insatiable desire to have more stuff, whether it's, more of our party in Congress or whether it's more, iPads. So that's the meditation is one of the practices within these contemplative or wisdom traditions, which are all about wisdom. And I actually listened to a really good lecture last week by a professor at Columbia, who's an expert in intelligence, theories of intelligence and adult development, which is very much within the leadership work that I do and the personal development work I do is understanding of life stages and different forms of intelligence. And he said, wonderful bit of research they're just about to publish about people in rural Kenya actually have a much more nuanced idea of intelligences than most educators in the West. And they have 4 types of intelligence that they look at. They have capability, knowledge, which is what we would call IQ, but they have these other 3, creativity, and practical, phronesis. What do we do now? How do I fix this, router? And then the 4th one is wisdom. And the way he described wisdom, I work, in wisdom as a kind of topic, I put wisdom on my stuff. And the way he described it was so great. Because I often get asked, what is wisdom? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll try and find some whatever solution to the question. But he just said, it's about making good choices for the whole, not just the part, as in you, the whole. And that really brought it down to me, which is leaders have to be wise because we have to make decisions for more than just us.
Yeah.
In our consciousness, we have to decide what ought to be, whether it's AI or how our app's going to work, or whether we're going to use recycled plastic in our products. There's a lot of ought questions every day. How our staff are going to be treated in lockdown, expectations, all this stuff. These are all ought questions. And I think without a practice, we call them reconnection practices, but you could call them wisdom practices. Some people call them spiritual practices, but that brings a whole nother connotation, which not always helpful. Without a practice to root ourselves back in our own experience of our consciousness and our own clarity of mind, it's really busy in here. And often we make really poor decisions when we're in that space. And that can be being wedded to a business model that's literally dying in front of our eyes, but we just can't see it because it's too terrifying to even imagine that our business model isn't right anymore because it's been right for 150 years or whatever, right through to treating people poorly in the workforce. So this is a really important job of a leader, is to take responsibility, take charge of your own consciousness. Because it's the only place you're going to have creative, innovative ideas, which is everyone wants creative, innovative, agile, blah. That's where it happens, is in your consciousness. But also we all have a moral imperative to get super real about the ought choices. And I think that's the best thing about these times we're in, is we're getting super real. And you said earlier, there's different ways of giving us feedback about our choices. Well, actually the human body is brilliant, right? You do something inappropriate for it and it either gives you pain or it gives you disease. There are pretty clear feedback loops. It might take you 20 years to get the disease, but it will give you the feedback will come back. And what this pandemic is a really it's like all the phones are going, guys, human species, human Inc., this is not working. You've got a lot of things that aren't working. So take heed, do something about it. That's what we're getting at the moment.